Section 3 of State of the Union Addresses by United States Presidents, 1923 to 1932. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joanne Turner. Section 3, President Calvin Coolidge, December 8, 1925. Members of the Congress. In meeting the constitutional requirement of informing the Congress upon the state of the Union, it is exceedingly gratifying to report that the general condition is one of progress and prosperity. Here and there are comparatively small and apparently temporary difficulties needing adjustment and improved administrative methods, such as are always to be expected. But in the fundamentals of government and business, the results demonstrate that we are going in the right direction. The country does not appear to require radical departures from the policies already adopted, so much as it needs a further extension of these policies and the improvement of details. The age of perfection is still in the somewhat distant future, but it is more in danger of being retarded by mistaken government activity than it is from lack of legislation. We are by far the most likely to accomplish permanent good if we proceed with moderation. In our country, the people are sovereign and independent and must accept the resulting responsibilities. It is their duty to support themselves and support the government. That is the business of the nation, whatever the charity of the nation may require. The functions which the Congress are to discharge are not those of local government, but of national government. The greatest solicitude should be exercised to prevent any encroachment upon the rights of the states or their various political subdivisions. Local self-government is one of our most precious possessions. It is the greatest contributing factor to the stability, strength, liberty, and progress of the nation. It ought not to be infringed by assault or undermined by purchase. It ought not to abdicate its power through weakness or resign its authority through favor. It does not at all follow that because abuses exist, it is the concern of the federal government to attempt the reform. Society is in much more danger from encumbering the national government beyond its wisdom to comprehend or its ability to administer than from leaving the local communities to bear their own burdens and remedy their own evils. Our local habit and custom is so strong, our variety of race and creed is so great, the federal authority is so tenuous, that the area within which it can function successfully is very limited. The wiser policy is to leave the localities, so far as we can, possessed of their own sources of revenue and charged with their own obligations. Government economy. It is a fundamental principle of our country that the people are sovereign. While they recognize the undeniable authority of the state, they have established as its instrument a government of limited powers. They hold inviolate in their own hands the jurisdiction over their own freedom and the ownership of their own property. Neither of these can be impaired except by due process of law. The wealth of our country is not public wealth, but private wealth. It does not belong to the government, it belongs to the people. The government has no justification in taking private property except for a public purpose. It is always necessary to keep these principles in mind in the laying of taxes and in the making of appropriations. No right exists to levy on a dollar or to order the expenditure of a dollar of the money of the people except for a necessary public purpose duly authorized by the Constitution. The power over the purse is the power over liberty. That is the legal limitation within which the Congress can act. How it will proceed within this limitation is always a question of policy. When the country is prosperous and free from debt, when the rate of taxation is low, opportunity exists for assuming new burdens and undertaking new enterprises. Such a condition now prevails only to a limited extent. All proposals for assuming new obligations ought to be postponed unless they are reproductive capital investments or are such as are absolutely necessary at this time. We still have an enormous debt of over $20 billion, on which the interest and sinking fund requirements are $1,320 million. Our appropriations for the Pension Office and the Veterans Bureau are $600 million. The War and Navy departments call for $642 million. Other requirements, exclusive of the Post Office, which is virtually self-sustaining, brought the appropriations for the current year up to almost $3,100,060,000. This shows an expenditure of close to $30 for every inhabitant of our country. For the average family of 5, it means a tax, directly or indirectly paid, of about $150 for national purposes alone. The local tax adds much more. These enormous expenditures ought not to be increased, but through every possible effort they ought to be reduced. Only one of these great items can be ultimately extinguished. That is the item of our war debt. Already this has been reduced to about $6 billion, which means an annual savings in interest of close to $250 million. The present interest charge is about $820 million yearly. It would seem to be obvious that the sooner this debt can be retired, the more the taxpayers will save in interest, and the easier it will be to secure funds with which to prosecute needed running expenses, constructions, and improvements. This item of $820 million for interest is a heavy charge on all the people of the country, and it seems to me that we might well consider whether it is not greatly worthwhile to dispense with it as early as possible by retiring the principal debt which it is required to serve. It has always been our policy to retire our debts. That of the Revolutionary War period, notwithstanding the additions made in 1812, was paid by 1835, and the Civil War debt within 23 years. Of the amount already paid, over $1 billion is a reduction in cash balances. That source is exhausted. Over 1 2/3 billions of dollars was derived from excess receipts. Tax reduction eliminates that. The sale of surplus war materials has been another element of our income. That is practically finished. With these eliminated, the reduction of the debt has been only about $500 million each year, not an excessive sum on so large a debt. Proposals have been made to extend the payment over a period of 62 years. If $1 billion is paid at the end of 20 years, the cost to the taxpayers is the principal and, if the interest is 4%, a total of $1,850 million. If the same sum is paid at the end of 62 years, the cost is $3,635 million, or almost double. Here is another consideration. Compared with its purchasing power in 1913, the dollar we borrowed represented but 52 cents. As the value of our dollar increases due to the falling prices of commodities, the burden of our debt increases. It has now risen to 63½ cents. The taxpayer will be required to produce nearly twice the amount of commodities to pay his debt if the dollar returns to the 1913 value. The more we pay while prices are high, the easier it will be. Deflation of government after a war period is slower than deflation of business, where curtailment is either prompt and effective or disaster follows. There is room for further economy in the cost of the federal government, but an accounting of current expenditures with pre-war expenditures is notable to the efficiency with which government business is now being done. The expenditures of 1916, the last pre-war year, were $742 million, and in 1925, over $3.5 billion, or nearly 5 times as great. If we subtract expenditures for debt retirements and interest, veterans relief, increase of pensions, and other special outlays, consisting of refunds, trust investments, and like charges, we find that the general expenditures of the government in 1925 were slightly more than twice as large as in 1916. As prices in 1925 were approximately 40% higher than in 1916, the cost of the same government must also have increased. But the government is not the same. It is more expensive to collect the much greater revenue necessary and to administer our great debt. We have given enlarged and improved services to agriculture and commerce. Above all, America has grown in population and wealth. Government expenditures must always share in this growth. Taking into account the factors I have mentioned, I believe that present federal expenses are not far out of line with pre-war expenses. We have nearly accomplished the deflation. This does not mean that further economies will not come. As we reduce our debt, our interest charges decline. There are many details yet to correct. The real improvement, however, must come not from additional curtailment of expenses, but by a more intelligent, more ordered spending. Our economy must be constructive. While we should avoid, as far as possible, increases in permanent current expenditures, oftentimes a capital outlay, like internal improvements, will result in actual constructive saving. That is economy in its best sense. It is an avoidance of waste, that there may be the means for an outlay today which will bring larger returns tomorrow. We should constantly engage in scientific studies of our future requirements and adopt an orderly program for their service. Economy is the method by which we prepare today to afford the improvements of tomorrow. A mere policy of economy without any instrumentalities for putting it into operation would be very ineffective. The Congress has wisely set up the Bureau of the Budget to investigate and inform the President what recommendations he ought to make for current appropriations. This gives a centralized authority where a general and comprehensive understanding can be reached of the sources of income and the most equitable distribution of expenditures. How well it has worked is indicated by the fact that the departmental estimates for 1922, before the budget law, were $4,068,000,000, while the budget estimates for 1927 are $3,156,000,000. This latter figure shows the reductions in departmental estimates for the coming year made possible by the operation of the budget system that the Congress has provided. But it is evidently not enough to have care in making appropriations without any restraint upon expenditure. The Congress has provided that check by establishing the office of Comptroller General. The purpose of maintaining the Budget Director and the Comptroller General is to secure economy and efficiency in government expenditure. No better method has been devised for the accomplishment of that end. These offices cannot be administered in all the various details without making some errors of both fact and of judgment. But the important consideration remains that these are the instrumentalities of the Congress, and that no other plan has ever been adopted which was so successful in promoting economy and efficiency. The Congress has absolute authority over the appropriations and is free to exercise its judgment, as the evidence may warrant, in increasing or decreasing budget recommendations. But it ought to resist every effort to weaken or break down this most beneficial system of supervising appropriations and expenditures. Without it, all the claim of economy would be a mere pretense. Taxation. The purpose of reducing expenditures is to secure a reduction in taxes. That purpose is about to be realized. With commendable promptness, the Ways and Means Committee of the House has undertaken, in advance of the meeting of the Congress, to frame a Revenue Act. As the bill has proceeded through the committee, it has taken on a nonpartisan character, and both Republicans and Democrats have joined in a measure which embodies many sound principles of tax reform. The bill will correct substantially the economic defects injected into the Revenue Act of 1924, as well as many which have remained as wartime legacies. In its present form, it should provide sufficient revenue for the government. The excessive surtaxes have been reduced. Estate tax rates are restored to more reasonable figures, with every prospect of withdrawing from the field when the states have had the opportunity to correct the abuses in their own inheritance tax laws. The gift tax and publicity section are to be repealed. Many miscellaneous taxes are lowered or abandoned, and the Board of Tax Appeals and the administrative features of the law are improved and strengthened. I approve of the bill in principle. Insofar as income tax exemptions are concerned, it seems to me the committee has gone as far as it is safe to go, and somewhat further than I should have gone. Any further extension along these lines would, in my opinion, impair the integrity of our income tax system. I'm advised that the bill will be through the House by Christmas. For this prompt action, the country can thank the good sense of the Ways and Means Committee in framing an economic measure upon economic considerations. If this attitude continues to be reflected through the Congress, the taxpayer will have his relief by the time his March 15th installment of income taxes is due. Nonpartisan effort means certain, quick action. Determination of a revenue law definitely, promptly, and solely as a revenue law is one of the greatest gifts a legislature can bestow upon its constituents. I commend the example of the Ways and Means Committee. If followed, it will place sound legislation upon the books in time to give the taxpayers the full benefit of tax reduction next year. This means that the bill should reach me prior to March 15. All these economic results are being sought not to benefit the rich, but to benefit the people. They are for the purpose of encouraging industry, in order that employment may be plentiful. They seek to make business good, in order that wages may be good. They encourage prosperity, in order that poverty may be banished from the home. They seek to lay the foundation which, through increased production, may give the people a more bountiful supply of the necessaries of life, afford more leisure for the improvement of the mind, the appreciation of the arts of music and literature, sculpture and painting, and the beneficial enjoyment of outdoor sports and recreation, enlarge the resources which minister to charity, and by all these means, attempting to strengthen the spiritual life of the nation. Foreign relations. The policy of our foreign relations, casting aside any suggestion of force, rests solely on the foundation of peace, goodwill, and good works. We have sought, in our intercourse with other nations, better understandings through conference and exchange of views, as befits beings endowed with reason. The results have been the gradual elimination of disputes, the settlement of controversies, and the establishment of a firmer friendship between America and the rest of the world than has ever existed at any previous time. The example of this attitude has not been without its influence upon other countries. Acting upon it, an adjustment was made of the difficult problem of reparations. This was the second step toward peace in Europe. It paved the way for the agreements which were drawn up at the Locarno Conference. When ratified, these will represent the third step toward peace. While they do not of themselves provide an economic rehabilitation, which is necessary for the progress of Europe, by strengthening the guarantees of peace, they diminish the need for great armaments. If the energy which now goes into military effort is transferred to productive endeavor, it will greatly assist economic progress. The Locarno agreements were made by the European countries directly interested, without any formal intervention of America, although on July 3rd I publicly advocated such agreements in an address made in Massachusetts. We have consistently refrained from intervening, except when our help has been sought and we have felt it could be effectively given, as in the settlement of reparations and the London Conference. These recent Locarno agreements represent the success of this policy, which we have been insisting ought to be adopted, of having European countries settle their own political problems without involving this country. This beginning seems to demonstrate that this policy is sound. It is exceedingly gratifying to observe this progress, both in its method and in its result, promises so much that is beneficial to the world. When these agreements are finally adopted, they will provide guarantees of peace that make the present prime reliance upon force in some parts of Europe very much less necessary. The natural corollary to these treaties should be further international contracts for the limitation of armaments. This work was successfully begun at the Washington Conference. Nothing was done at that time concerning land forces because of European objection. Our standing army has been reduced to about 118,000, about the necessary police force for 115 million people. We are not proposing to increase it, nor is it supposable that any foreign country looks with the slightest misapprehension upon our land forces. They do not menace anybody. They are rather a protection to everybody. The question of disarming upon land is so peculiarly European in its practical aspects that our country would look with particular gratitude upon any action which those countries might take to reduce their own military forces. This is in accordance with our policy of not intervening unless the European powers are unable to agree and make request for our assistance. Whenever they are able to agree of their own accord, it is especially gratifying to us, and such agreements may be sure of our sympathetic support. It seems clear that it is the reduction of armies, rather than of navies, that is of the first importance to the world at the present time. We shall look with great satisfaction upon that effort and give it our approbation and encouragement. If that can be settled, we may more easily consider further reduction and limitation of naval armaments. For that purpose, our country has constantly, through its executive and through repeated acts of Congress, indicated its willingness to call such a conference. Under congressional sanction, it would seem to be wise to participate in any conference of the great powers for naval limitation of armament, proposed upon such conditions that it would hold a fair promise of being effective. The general policy of our country is for disarmament, and it ought not to hesitate to adopt any practical plan that might reasonably be expected to succeed. But it would not care to attend a conference which, from its location or constituency, would, in all probability, prove futile. In the further pursuit of strengthening the bonds of peace and goodwill, we have joined with other nations in an international conference held at Geneva and signed an agreement, which will be laid before the Senate for ratification, providing suitable measures for control and for publicity in international trade in arms, ammunition, and implements of war, and also executed a protocol providing for a prohibition of the use of poison gas in war, in accordance with the principles of Article 5 of the treaty relating thereto, signed at the Washington Conference. We are supporting the Pan-American efforts that are being made toward the codification of international law, and looking with sympathy on the investigations conducted under philanthropic auspices of the proposal to agreements outlawing war. In accordance with the promises made at the Washington Conference, we have urged the calling of, and are now represented, at the Chinese Customs Conference and on the Commission on Extraterritoriality, where it will be our policy, so far as possible, to meet the aspirations of China in all ways consistent with the interests of the countries involved. Court of International Justice. Pending before the Senate for nearly 3 years is the proposal to adhere to the protocol establishing the Permanent Court of International Justice. A well-established line of precedents mark America's effort to effect the establishment of a court of this nature. We took a leading part in laying the foundation on which it rests, in the establishment of the Hague Court of Arbitration. It is that tribunal which nominates the judges, who are elected by the Council and Assembly of the League of Nations. The proposal submitted to the Senate was made dependent upon 4 conditions, the first of which is that by supporting the court, we do not assume any obligations under the League. Second, that we may participate upon an equality with other states in the election of judges. Third, that the Congress shall determine what part of the expenses we shall bear. Fourth, that the statute creating the court shall not be amended without our consent. And to these I have proposed an additional condition, to the effect that we are not to be bound by advisory opinions rendered without our consent. The court appears to be independent of the League. It is true the judges are elected by the Assembly and Council, but they are nominated by the Court of Arbitration, which we assisted to create and of which we are a part. The court was created by its statute, so called, which is really a treaty made among some 48 different countries that might properly be called a constitution of the court. This statute provides a method by which the judges are chosen, so that when the Court of Arbitration nominates them and the Assembly and Council of the League elect them, they are not acting as instruments of the Court of Arbitration or instruments of the League, but as instruments of the statute. This will be even more apparent if our representatives sit with the members of the Council and Assembly in electing the judges. It is true they are paid through the League, though not by the League, but by the countries which are members of the League, and by our country if we accept the protocol. The judges are paid by the League only in the same sense that it could be said United States judges are paid by the Congress. The court derives all its authority from the statute, and is so completely independent of the League that it could go on functioning if the League were disbanded, at least until the terms of the judges expired. The most careful provisions are made in the statute as to the qualifications of judges. Those who make the nominations are recommended to consult with their highest court of justice, their law schools and academies. The judges must be persons of high moral character, qualified to hold the highest judicial offices in that country, or be jurisconsults of recognized competence in international law. It must be assumed that these requirements will continue to be carefully met, and with America joining the countries already concerned, it is difficult to comprehend how human ingenuity could better provide for the establishment of a court which would maintain its independence. It has to be recognized that independence is, to a considerable extent, a matter of ability, character, and personality. Some effort was made in the early beginnings to interfere with the independence of our Supreme Court. It did not succeed because of the quality of the men who made up that tribunal. It does not seem that the authority to give advisory opinions interferes with the independence of the court. Advisory opinions, in and of themselves, are not harmful, but may be used in a way as to be very beneficial, because they undertake to prevent injury rather than merely afford a remedy after the injury has been done. As a principle, that only implies that the court shall function when proper application is made to it. Deciding the question involved upon issues submitted for an advisory opinion does not differ materially from deciding the question involved upon issues submitted by contending parties. Up to the present time, the court has given an advisory opinion when it judged it had jurisdiction, and refused to give one when it judged it did not have jurisdiction. Nothing in the work of the court has yet been an indication that this is an impairment of its independence, or that its practice differs materially from the giving of like opinions under the authority of the constitutions of several of our states. No provision of the statute seems to me to give this court any authority to be a political rather than a judicial court. We have brought cases in this country before our courts which, when they have been adjudged to be political, have been thereby dismissed. It is not improbable that political questions will be submitted to this court. But again, up to the present time, the court has refused to pass on political questions, and our support would undoubtedly have a tendency to strengthen it in that refusal. We are not proposing to subject ourselves to any compulsory jurisdiction. If we support the court, we can never be obliged to submit any case which involves our interests for its decision. Our appearance before it would always be voluntary, for the purpose of presenting a case which we had agreed might be presented. There is no more danger that others might bring cases before the court involving our interests, which we did not wish to have brought, after we have adhered, and probably not so much, that there would be of bringing such cases if we do not adhere. I think that we would have the same legal or moral right to disregard such a finding in the one case than we would in the other. If we are going to support any court, it will not be one that we have set up alone, or which reflects only our ideals. Other nations have their customs and their institutions, their thoughts and their methods of life. If a court is going to be international, its composition will have to yield to what is good in all these various elements. Neither will it be possible to support a court which is exactly perfect, or under which we assume absolutely no obligations. If we are seeking that opportunity, we might as well declare that we are opposed to supporting any court. If any agreement is made, it will be because it undertakes to set up a tribunal which can do some of the things that other nations wish to have done. We shall not find ourselves bearing a disproportionate share of the world's burdens by our adherence, and we may as well remember that there is absolutely no escape for our country from bearing its share of the world's burdens in any case. We shall do far better service to ourselves and to others if we admit this and discharge our duties voluntarily, than if we deny it and are forced to meet the same obligations unwillingly. It is difficult to imagine anything that would be more helpful to the world than stability, tranquility, and international justice. We may say that we are contributing to these factors independently, but others, less fortunately located, do not and cannot make a like contribution except through mutual cooperation. The old balance of power, mutual alliances, and great military forces were not brought about by any mutual dislike for independence, but resulted from the domination of circumstances. Ultimately, they were forced on us. Like all others engaged in the war, whatever we said as a matter of fact, we joined an alliance. We became a military power. We impaired our independence. We have more at stake than anyone else in avoiding a repetition of that calamity. Wars do not spring into existence. They arise from small incidents and trifling irritations, which can be adjusted by an international court. We can contribute greatly to the advancement of our ideals by joining with other nations in maintaining such a tribunal. Foreign debts. Gradually, settlements have been made which provide for the liquidation of debts due to our government from foreign governments. Those made with Great Britain, Finland, Hungary, Lithuania, and Poland have already been approved by the Congress. Since the adjournment, further agreements have been entered into with Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Latvia, Estonia, Italy, and Romania. These 11 nations, which have already made settlements, represent $6,419,528,641 of the original principal of the loans. The principal sums without interest still pending are the debt of France of $3,340,000,000, Greece $15 million, Yugoslavia $51 million, Liberia $26,000, Russia $192 million, which those at present in control have undertaken openly to repudiate, Nicaragua $84,000, which is being paid currently, and Austria $24 million, on which, by act of Congress, a moratorium of 20 years has been granted. The only remaining sum is $12 million due from Armenia, which has now ceased to exist as an independent nation. In accordance with the settlements made, the amount of principal and interest which is to be paid to the United States under these agreements aggregate $15,200,688,253.93. It is obvious that the remaining settlements, which will undoubtedly be made, will bring this sum up to an amount which will more than equal the principal due on our present national debt. While these settlements are very large in the aggregate, it has been felt that the terms granted were, in all cases, very generous. They impose no undue burden and are mutually beneficial in the observance of international faith and the improvement of international credit. Every reasonable effort will be made to secure agreements for liquidation with the remaining countries, whenever they are in such condition that they can be made. Those which have already been negotiated under the bipartisan commission established by the Congress have been made only after the most thoroughgoing and painstaking investigation, continued for a long time before meeting with the representatives of the countries concerned. It is believed that they represent, in each instance, the best that can be done and the wisest settlement that can be secured. One very important result is the stabilization of foreign currency, making exchange assist rather than embarrass our trade. Wherever sacrifices have been made of money, it will be more than amply returned in better understanding and friendship, while, insofar as these adjustments will contribute to the financial stability of the debtor countries, to their good order, prosperity, and progress, They represent hope of improved trade relations and mutual contributions to the civilization of the world. Alien problem. Negotiations are progressing among the interested parties in relation to the final distribution of the assets in the hands of the alien property custodian. Our government and people are interested as creditors. The German government and people are interested as debtors and owners of the seized property. Pending the outcome of these negotiations, I do not recommend any affirmative legislation. For the present, we should continue in possession of this property, which we hold as security for the settlement of claims due to our people and our government. Immigration. While not enough time has elapsed to afford a conclusive demonstration, such results as have been secured indicate that our immigration law is, on the whole, beneficial. It is undoubtedly a protection to the wage earners of this country. The situation should, however, be carefully surveyed in order to ascertain whether it is working a needless hardship upon our own inhabitants. If it deprives them of the comfort and society of those bound to them by close family ties, such modification should be adopted as will afford relief, always in accordance with the principle that our government owes its first duty to our own people, and that no alien inhabitant of another country has any legal rights whatever under our Constitution and laws. It is only through treaty or through residence here that such rights accrue. But we should not, however, be forgetful of the obligations of a common humanity. While our country numbers among its best citizens many of those of foreign birth, yet those who now enter in violation of our laws by that very act thereby place themselves in a class of undesirables. Investigation reveals that any considerable number are coming here in defiance of our immigration restrictions. It will undoubtedly create the necessity for the registration of all aliens. We ought to have no prejudice against an alien because he is an alien. The standard which we apply to our inhabitants is that of manhood, not place of birth. Restrictive immigration is, to a large degree, for economic purposes. It is applied in order that we may not have a larger annual increment of good people within our borders, that we can weave into our economic fabric in such a way as to supply their needs without undue injury to ourselves. End of section 3.